Hi everyone, welcome to Chapter 15 review. This is going to be about the Second Great Awakening and higher learning. Reviving religion. Religion from 1790 to 1860 indicated that church attendance was still a regular ritual for 3/4 of 23 million Americans. Alexis de Tocqueville had declared that there was no country in the world where Christian religion retains a greater influence over the souls of men than in America. Yet religion of this era was not old-time religion of colonial days. Calvinism was declining in American churches. Rationalist ideas of the French Revolutionary era softened the older orthodoxy. Thomas Paine's The Age of Reason, written in 1794, declared that churches were set up to terrify and enslave mankind and monopolize power and profit. Many founding fathers, including Jefferson and Franklin, embraced Paine's liberal deism. This term is used chiefly as an intellectual movement to describe an intellectual movement in the 17th and 18th centuries that accepted the existence of a creator on the basis of reason, but rejected the belief in a supernatural deity who interacts with mankind. Deism relied on reason rather than on revelation, on science rather than the Bible. It rejected the concept of original sin, denied Christ's divinity, yet deists believed that there was a supreme being who created a knowable universe and who endowed human beings with a capacity for moral behavior. Deism reflected continuing religious debates over free will and human salvation. Over time, many Protestants downplayed Calvinist emphasis on predestination and human depravity. Instead, they stressed essential goodness of human nature. They also proclaimed the belief in free will and possibility of salvation through good works. They pictured God not as a stern creator, but as a loving father. Such ideas flourished among Methodists, Baptists, and Unitarians. They also affected Presbyterians and Congregationalists. Religious ferment propelled a wave of revivals in the early 1800s that was called the Second Great Awakening. The Second Great Awakening was one of the most momentous episodes in the history of American religion. Countless souls were converted. It shattered and reorganized many churches, created numerous new sects, encouraged evangelicalism in many areas of American life, and spurred prison reform, the temperance cause, the women's movement, and the crusade to abolish slavery. The Second Great Awakening spread on the frontier through huge camp meetings, where up to 25,000 people would gather for several days to listen to a preacher. Thousands of spiritually starved souls got religion through these meetings. Many of the saved soon backslid into their former sinful ways, though after a period of time, and the revivals boosted church attendance. They stimulated a variety of humanitarian reforms. Missionary work in Africa, Asia, Hawaii, and in the West with the Indians was picking up speed. Methodists and Baptists reaped the most abundant harvest of souls. Both stressed personal conversion, which was a relatively democratic control of church affairs, and rousing emotionalism. Peter Cartwright was the best known of the Methodist circuit riders of traveling to along the frontier as a preacher. This is a picture of a religious camp meeting by Mays Burbank, created in 1839. Charles Grandison Finney was one of the greatest revival preachers as well. He had a deeply moving conversion experience. He led massive revivals in Rochester and New York City in 1830 and 1831. He preached a version of old-time religion, but was also an innovator. He devised the anxious bench, where repentant sinners could sit in full view of the congregation, and encouraged women to pray aloud in public. This is a picture of Charles Grandison Finney, and you can read about his career if you pause the video. He also denounced both alcohol and slavery and served as president of Oberlin College in Ohio, which he helped make a hotbed of revivalist activity and abolitionism. The key feature of the Second Great Awakening was the feminization of religion, both in church membership and theology. Middle-class women were first and most fervent enthusiasts of religious revivalism, and they made up the majority of the new church members. They were most likely to stay with the church even after the revival period. Evangelicals preached a gospel of female spiritual worth. They offered women an active role in bringing their husbands and families back to God. Many women then turned to saving the rest of society and formed a host of benevolent and charitable organizations, spearheading most of the era's ambitious reforms. Revivals further fragmented the religious faiths. In Western New York, they were so blistered by sermonizers preaching hellfire and damnation that it came to be known as the burned-over district. Millerites, or Adventists, rose from the burned-over district soil in the 1830s. They were named after William Miller, who interpreted the Bible to mean that Christ would return on October 22nd, 1844. Failure of Jesus to descend on schedule dampened but did not destroy the movement. Like the First Great Awakening, the second tended to widen lines between classes and religions. Prosperous and conservative denominations in the East were less affected. Episcopalians, Presbyterians, Congregationalists, and Unitarians tended to come from wealthier, better educated urban areas. Methodists, Baptists, and other sects tended to come from less prosperous, less learned communities in the rural South and in the West. Religious diversity reflected the growing social cleavages regarding slavery. In 1854 to 1855, Southern Baptists and Southern Methodists split from their northern brethren. In 1857, Presbyterians, North and South, parted company. Secession of Southern churches foreshadowed the secession of the Southern states. First churches split, then political parties split, then the Union would split. The Mormons were led by Joseph Smith, who received the golden plates in 1830, which constituted the Book of Mormon. They are also called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Mormons went first to Ohio, then to Missouri, and on to Illinois. They antagonized their neighbors by voting as a unit. They openly drilled militia for defensive purposes, and there were accusations of polygamy against Smith. Polygamy means that he had more than one wife. In 1844, Smith and his brother were murdered by a mob in Carthage, Illinois. Brigham Young then took over leadership. He proved to be an aggressive leader, an eloquent preacher, a gifted administrator, and who was determined to escape further persecution, so he led the oppressed Mormons to Utah in 1846 to 1847. This is a picture of the Mormon trekkers crossing the Mississippi on the ice after they were driven out of Illinois. Mormons soon made the desert bloom by means of ingenious and cooperative irrigation. The crop of 1848, which was threatened by crickets, was saved by a flock of gulls, and there is actually a monument to seagulls that still stands in Salt Lake City. The semi-arid Utah region grew remarkably quickly. 5,000 settlers had arrived by the end of 1848. You can see the Mormon world in this map. The Mormons rapidly expanded their desert colony, which they called Deseret, especially among the Mormon corridor that stretched from Salt Lake City to Southern California. In 1850, many dedicated Mormons made the 1,300-mile trek across the plains pulling two-wheeled carts. Under Young's disciplined management, the community became a prosperous frontier theocracy and cooperative commonwealth. Young married as many as 27 women and begot 56 children. The population grew with thousands of immigrants from Europe, where Mormons had a flourishing missionary movement. The crisis developed when the U.S. government was unable to control Brigham Young, who had been made the territorial governor in 1850. Federal troops marched in 1857 against the Mormons. Fortunately, the quarrel was settled without serious bloodshed. The Mormons had problems with anti-polygamy laws that were passed by Congress in 1862 and 1882. The marital customs delayed statehood for Utah until 1896. The tax-supported primary schools were very scarce in the early years of the Republic. They were primarily to educate children of the poor, the so-called ragged schools. Advocates of free public education first met stiff opposition, and taxes for education came to be seen as an insurance that the wealthy paid for stability and democracy. The tax-supported public education lagged in the South but grew in the North between 1825 and 1850. Gaining of manhood suffrage for whites helped this movement, and a free vote cried aloud for free education. The famed Little Red Schoolhouse became the shrine of American democracy. This is a picture called The Country School by Winslow Homer, painted in 1871. Early schools stayed open only a few months of the year. School teachers, mainly men, were ill-trained, ill-tempered, and ill-paid. There was more stress on lickin' than in larnin'. They usually taught the 3 R's, readin', writin', and arithmetic. Too many rugged Americans suspicious of book larnin', this was plenty. Horace Mann, who lived from 1796 to 1859, was secretary of the Massachusetts Board of Education, and while he held that position, he championed more and better schoolhouses, longer school terms, higher pay for teachers, and an expanded curriculum. His influence radiated out to other states and improvements were made. Yet education remained an expensive luxury for many communities. By 1860, the nation counted only 100 public secondary schools and nearly 1 million white adult illiterates. Black slaves in the South were legally forbidden to receive instruction in reading and writing. Free blacks in both the North and South were usually excluded from schools. Educational advances aided by improved textbooks, especially by Noah Webster, during the time period, Noah Webster, who lived 1758 to 1843. His books were designed to promote patriotism. He devoted 20 years to his famous dictionary. Published in 1828, it helped to standardize the American language. William H. McGuffie was a teacher and preacher of rare power. He created grade school readers, which were first published in the 1830s and sold 122 million copies. McGuffie's readers, as they were called, hammered home lessons in morality, patriotism, and idealism. Higher education began with the Second Great Awakening, which created many small, denominational, liberal arts colleges. These were chiefly in the South and West. New colleges offered narrow, traditional curriculum of Latin, Greek, mathematics, and moral philosophy. And the first state-supported university in North Carolina was created in 1795. The University of Virginia had been created in 1819. It was the brainchild of Thomas Jefferson. The university was dedicated to freedom from religion or political shackles. Modern languages and sciences received emphasis at the university. Higher education for women was frowned upon in the early decades of the 1800s. Women's education was to be in the home. Prejudices prevailed that too much learning injured the brain, undermined the health, and rendered a young lady unfit for marriage. Some access for women for college and for higher learning began with Oberlin College, which admitted women in 1837, and Mount Holyoke Seminary, which opened to women in 1837. These are pictures of the women graduates of the Oberlin College class of 1855. Adult learners used private subscription libraries or increasingly public libraries. House-to-house peddlers fed the public appetite for culture. Traveling lecturers carried learning to the masses through Lyceum lecture associations. This was a platform for speakers in science, literature, and moral philosophy. Lyceum denotes a hall for public lectures or discussions. Magazines flourished in the pre-Civil War years, but most withered after a short life. Next, we'll talk more about the Age of Reform and the reform movements that were spurned as a result of the Second Great Awakening.